your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite, from the great organization Blue Door. Blue Door's organization in York Region, Durham Region, and Peel. Care program, and we run a construction social enterprise called Construct, where we into well-paying and meaningful work in the trades. We could build the housing we desperately need. Listen, we do that much more. A wonderful group of over 130 people on my team. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. Hey, let's get to today's guest. We've been talking with Cadco for years about the wonderful work they're doing, and say, we've got to talk with you, we've got to have you on the show. And finally they're here. We're very privileged to have Adrian Schut with us, who's Cadco's Director of Real Estate and Construction, as well, because he needed some extra work. He is now their acting president. And so Adrian and I talk about his journey into this work. He came from kind of the construction sector into this work, which is sometimes we find the opposite. We're coming from the social sector. We're trying to develop our construction skills. So him being at Cadco, what a great mix. We talk about the history of Cadco, how it came about, what it does, what its purpose is there. We talk about the professional development work they're doing. Our sector, often we have land, we know there's a need there, and we want to develop more, but we have no idea where to even start. So Cadco really helps people understand that, what they're getting into. It's like a new language, really learning it. And I've found that out in my team at Blue Door firsthand as we've gotten to the development end of things. It's very, very different, not something we're prepared for. So he talks about that and the work they're doing there, some of the organizations that are involved. He talks about some of the challenges and solutions, building, moving forward in the housing crisis. He talks about some of the stuff he's really proud of, the work they've done, some of the cool stuff that's happening, some of the trends. He talks about a trend, some of the positive trends that are happening in construction, where we're actually coming in with lower costs because the capacity is there right now in our sector to build a little bit more, and that might not be there forever. He talks about the hopes moving forward for Cadco, and where you can find out more information. It's a wonderful organization doing really impactful work and filling a real gap in our sector. So check them out at cadco.org and check out this episode. Listen to Adrian. He's brilliant, fun, and it's a fabulous listen. Let's go to that conversation now. Adrian, thanks so much for making the time today to join us on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, you and your organization are doing incredible work. But before we get to that, we always have the standing question we ask all our guests, and that is, what does home mean to you?
I'm so glad I listened to a couple of these before. I've actually listened to quite a few now, because I feel like that would be that interview question you throw in when you're hiring somebody just to see how they react. And I've thought about it a lot actually over the last week. And I think what's interesting for me is I think it's changed, and I can acknowledge as I look at it now that maybe it's not what it always was. So it's a feeling now, and I think it's a lot around consistency. And I say consistency because I live in the mayhem of 3 kids, and a busy household with activities, and we got little kids and bigger kids. It's a full house. But for me, it's that consistency. It's that that same feeling of comfort that comes with that, even amongst the mayhem. But I grew up in small town Ontario, and I think when I was younger, as I was growing up, I really thought that home was that small town of Almont where I was from. And I think over time, I realized, I moved to the city and it wasn't that bad. That didn't make home not that thing that I had thought it was. And so for me, it's really evolved, where I thought it was really a place, and it's the people, but it's that feeling of, that consistency of every day.
Very cool. And yeah, so interesting. You got small kids, big kids, busy life, busy work life. We always want to learn more about our guests. We've learned a little bit about you, but you come from a different, like many people in the housing homelessness sector actually come from it from a social service side of things, and not so much for yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into the work you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I would start by saying I always thought I wanted to be a farmer, and that was completely out of reach because, for those of you, we all know what real estate now from a housing context. If you want to talk about expensive land, let's look at farmland. And my parents weren't going to be able to get me into that, so that became a quick no. And I saw from there, though, that what I really wanted was to build things. And so my journey was this is not where I expected to end up, and I've heard, I think it's a lot of us. I think it's where most of us are. This is not where we thought we'd be, but I couldn't be happier with where I am. And so I started actually in carpentry. My background is in residential carpentry, and building custom homes, high performance homes. I moved from there into was an apprentice first getting started, and then I was self employed for about 7 years, and continued building, working again with higher performance technologies, which led me to a project that started actually the day that our youngest was born, where we were doing foundation work for Habitat for Humanity, and there was an opportunity for my team and I to move on to that team at Habitat, which pulled us into the housing sector. And a couple of members of my team came with me, and we joined the Habitat team in Ottawa. And from there, we were able to build a couple of really neat, successful projects, and then ultimately, about a year ago, I moved to Cadco to continue that work and expand a little bit further in the real estate development and construction field.
Yeah, and we are glad you have. And now, like, not only so you are the director of real estate construction and acting president because you needed some more work to do, right?
It's always the case, it's always good to have enough to keep you busy, and like I said, it's the mayhem at home, and I don't mind the same thing. But yeah, it's a busy spot, but we have a lot of really interesting things on the go, so I wouldn't change it.
And speaking of those interesting things, you're like beautiful segues right into. Thanks for setting me up. Let's talk about Catco. For those who are not familiar, probably very few of our listenership, but can you tell us a little bit about it? How was it formed? What is its purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cadco's 28 years old. So in the scope of housing, I know there's a lot of 50th anniversaries this year. There's a couple of big ones, but we're not there, although we're tied to one. But we'll still attend your parties. But Cadco is an organization that was created in the mid 90s, in 96, after a time when there was a lot of really remarkable funding programs. We saw a lot of growth in the housing sector, right? There was all kinds of programs in the earlier years, which had been creating a lot of housing. And we were actually created by Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, CCOC, which is Ottawa's second largest nonprofit housing corporation, the largest that's not tied in with the city, which is Ottawa Community Housing. And so they created Cadco in the 90s as a way to sort of keep the development team rolling in a time when the market for developing housing was not as strong as it is even today under the National Housing Strategy, or as it had been. And so it was created as a way to really, create projects not just for CCOC, but for other organizations. So over the years, the ebb and flow of development, the ebb and flow of funding for nonprofits, the organization Cadco has grown, fairly steadily after a while, and we've to date built hundreds of units, not only for our sister organization CCOC, but also for dozens and dozens of other organizations across Ontario. We're centered in Ottawa, so we're based in downtown Ottawa. And so we do tend to work in that sort of radius with most of our projects. But that was sort of what got us going. And then over the years, we've sort of seen that morph, because our mission is to, we always we have a few interpretations to it, but our mission is to create and promote housing for low and moderate income folk. And so we've actually done affordable home ownership projects over the years back, and also working towards rentals and supportive housing projects and all kinds of different things for different groups, depending on what their needs are.
Yeah, you guys have done incredible work. It's interesting in our sector. So many of us were used to operating programs, and we're not used to building housing, right? And part of the reason, Adrian, is because we have no clue how to do it. Me being one of them, right? And Blue Door being one of them. That we were like, all right, we're operating, we're good. And then we realized that in the midst of a housing crisis, maybe it's time for nonprofits to step up and be part of that solution. So what do we do? How do we even get started? And Catco has been really good, right? So talk a little bit about, you provide resources of professional development and training for housing professionals in the sector. I think just for that reason, can you talk a little bit about how that works and who's been involved?
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that was identified, we've been able to see this at Cadco because we have kind of a unique perspective, right? We work with a lot of housing providers who are experts in what they do. They do phenomenal work, and it's a totally different ballgame, to your point. Developing new housing of any kind is not the same as living in it. It's not the same as owning it and operating it. And it takes a different set of skills and professional qualifications and just experience to be effective. And so we realized a number of years ago that a lot of what we had to do to keep projects from falling apart was not actually, be a project manager that was really trying to, like, nudge this thing forwards. How can we get this group to move forwards? What we have to do is educate. And so a large part of what we try to do is provide the education to these groups as we go. So our process definitely involves a lot of education. But in addition to that, we actually launched a program a couple of years ago called the Toolbox Plus, where we receive funding from the Housing Supply Challenge to create a program to actually move on with a national mandate to provide training and capacity building for affordable housing development. And you can use those resources in different ways. Some groups would use it to, get their board ready, the organizational readiness and understanding their own capacity, and what should you keep with your team in house and what should you take, and get a consultant to work on. Cadco doesn't work everywhere. There's lots of examples of other great nonprofit development and market consultants who are experts in doing this across the country, but some places don't have access if we're looking at remote communities. So we've seen groups go from that and actually do their own projects, but also groups who come and say, okay, I just really want to be a good client so that my construction manager finds me easier to work with. How do I work better with the architecture firms and the design professionals to make this a successful process? And so we provide a range of trainings through this program, to help folks in the sector to be more effective at this part of the process, which is not their everyday.
No, no, not at all. I mean, it's so funny, like learning terms like CCD, 410. I'm like, what? I have no idea what you're talking. Like, things like that when we started out, right? Well, are you shovel ready? Well, what does that mean? What is shovel? Do I go through a shovel in the ground? We're shovel ready, or like what? And listen, I mean, it's very, like to get funding. There's all these different pieces that have to be in place, and you have to work with different people. So it is critical. What's the response been? Have you had a lot of organizations take part in this?
Absolutely. We've had well over 100. We're probably closer to 200 organizations now that we've worked with in this sort of capacity, in building capacity within the sector. And our programs have evolved, and they're actually continuing to evolve. This is a neat time and place to talk about it, because in early 25 we're sort of adjusting our programs a little bit. They've been based a little bit more around education to date, and we still have the education within the way that we like. That's sort of a principle for us that we want to be providing education. But what we've realized for some groups is that we can't reach everybody by providing it as education. Sometimes we need to provide it as training. Professional development might be an easier kind of avenue for some groups to fit it into their budgets, to fit it into their days. To how much time can you commit to these things? And it's important that we build the capacity within the sector, but uptake is really important. So we've had a really great opportunity to do a more intensive education for the last couple of years, and we're going to be having some new programs. We're calling them. We're still sticking the name on it, but probably a 2-day intensive sort of program, to upskill folks into understanding what to do in the construction process. Go through all those CCDC contracts and which ones which, and how do you work with them, and what makes it a good fit for your project, and getting that into a couple of days where you can also connect with a few other folks in the sector who are at a similar point in their projects somewhere else.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so helpful. I think personally we'll be looking to sign up for that because it's a different world that we have to get into, right? And we have to take I keep saying this, we need to take some big swings if we're going to make a real dent in what's happening right now in the housing crisis. Um, so Cadco talks about helping others build solutions in the housing crisis. What does that look like? And what are some of the greatest challenges to making that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't know when people come through the door figuratively. Most people aren't coming through the door anymore, come to us online. But when you get to see a group and figuring out what their challenges are, we spend a lot of time getting to know every new client that we work with, because it's so, even as we have similarities between our organizations, we have such a patchwork quilt across the sector of such passionate people that have done some really great things. um, but we're always trying to draw some similarities. So what we do, about building these solutions, is get to know our clients first and foremost, these organizations that want to do these things. And so we've seen a couple of interesting projects we've been able to put together over the last couple of years. And I think of one group that we've done a lot of work with. We work a lot with faith-based groups who have land and have often some capital, or maybe capacity, depending. They're owners of large amounts of real estate. They're familiar with maintaining it. Maybe a slightly different mandate, but they actually have often a lot of the bits and pieces that are needed to get these things going at the early game. And so some of our projects, we just recently had a project completed in Bell's Corner, so sort of I guess Western Ottawa, which was a really neat project that was set up by the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa. It was an interesting sort of way to put together a project, and the ideation of these happened 5, 6, 7 years ago. It takes a long time to get there, but every one we sort of see as a solution, because there's usually not a clear path, right? If real estate development were a super clear path, I'd love to be out of a job, but it's not realistic because it is complicated. There's all these bits and pieces, and so we've been able to work with a lot of different partners, and including municipalities, to come to some of these solutions on an individual project level.
And it's super challenging. I mean, we're looking at this now. So Blue Door is setting up, or we've set up a housing for all land trust, right? So we're getting land. We're like, perfect. Like, so how do we now take this land and develop, like, trying to find the funds? We did a project where we had we're doing it now. We had 14, we're taking down a small house, putting up 14 stack townhomes. Now, 14 was not enough to, run the pro forma, and, that you can carry some debt and do affordable housing. So we had to pay for it in full. Right. So make it 100% affordable. So we had to raise $9 million. Not an easy task in this environment. We have changing governments, different things happening. But to take on big debt to make those big swings happen is pretty scary. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing that groups are facing?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think there's an uncertainty that people are feeling, and in the sector right now, not knowing. We're seeing the sunsetting of some of these national housing strategy programs, regardless of what happens in a change in government. A lot of those are due to end in the 27 range, anyways. Um, but there are a lot of challenges around getting projects to pencil, which is not unique to affordable housing. And I think it's really important that we remember that it's not something that we struggle with. Real estate development in general requires a lot of it's a very iterative process always. Like any pro forma that you run into a project and you go build that project is probably going to have massive flaws, right? Like you want to find those problems. That's a good sign that you're actually digging them out before it's too late, right? And so um we tend to look at those challenges as the it's what makes the diamond shine in the end. It's an important part of that process. So we do see right now construction costs obviously in the pandemic really made it hard to pencil projects in that way. um, Rents are rising and competition is there. I think actually what we're seeing right now, which I want to highlight, is amidst the challenges that we've had and will continue to have, with interest rates bouncing as they are wont to do. One of the things and one of the unique opportunities that we have right now in building affordable housing is the fact that the construction industry, at least across much of Ontario, and it's not across the whole country, but certainly across Ontario right now, we're seeing that it's not fully saturated. There is capacity in the building sector, which is my background, to actually do these projects. And in a few years from now, when things start to bounce back, we're going to be clawing a little bit more with the market developers and everybody else to actually get the workforces on the sites to build the homes that we're trying to build. And so I actually think that that's what I would like to highlight almost more than the challenges that we face, which are have been the same for the last number of years for the most part. That's one of the really cool opportunities. And so I think I'm optimistic that we're seeing tenders go out for projects at the moment, and they're coming in lower than what we'd originally budgeted. Our budgets usually have a habit of sneaking up as time goes on, and most recently we've had them come down. And a few of our partners have recently completed projects under budget, which wasn't happening a few years ago. So it's once you get to that critical point in the next little while, it's still hard to get that pro forma to pencil. But the projects that we're seeing go ahead, especially in the wood frame part 9 or part 3, like those up to maybe a 6-story mid-rise building, they're turning out better than we had anticipated when we first got into them.
That's awesome. I mean, it's so incredible. I mean, I've heard people that had, large scale projects that had an agreement a couple of years back now are saying, as they're starting, we need to renegotiate because costs have gone up and we can't afford to build, or we don't want to build condos because no one's buying them in the GTA anyways. And so we want to go to rental, but that's a different payback. And so we're seeing all sorts of, like, it's so weird in a housing crisis in Toronto anyways, the GTA. It's like, we're saying we desperately need people in the trades to build this, and then they're not building anything, right? So now we're putting all these people through, and it's hurry up and wait. We know at some point the dam's going to burst, right? And there's all these projects that as interest rates drop, and it takes time to catch up. But yeah, it's certainly interesting. Any other trends that you're seeing, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, the construction costing is the one that's really probably the most critical. But I think one of the ones that I want to highlight that I think has been really interesting for us is seeing where folks are coming to us to build housing. So again, we're an Ottawa-centric organization. Most of you probably know where Ottawa is. It's a fairly familiar city to most of us here. But we're bordered by the river onto the Quebec side, so we work in that radius, to the south. We don't tend to work much into the Gatineau side. And what's interesting is in the last 6 months, we've seen more projects come to us, which are actually have a really good potential to work out, that are looking like they have a healthier performa. They're more likely to move ahead in rural and smaller communities that are surrounding the city. And so this is true in a lot of places. I think we're seeing a lot of smaller municipalities, two-tier municipalities, coming together and realizing that they actually have the tools to work on combating the crisis as much or more so than big cities do at times. They can be more nimble, and so it's really interesting to see. I think it's worth highlighting one of the projects that's maybe a little bit more advanced that we're working on, is a conversion of a project that was originally a student residence on a campus that's been closed, and is now we're hoping to put anywhere between 50 and maybe even 65 units of affordable housing in there. So a really interesting kind of project that we'd have, I think, a harder time doing this. We've done similar ones in the city and in bigger urban centers. Sometimes the support that we can get and the opportunities that are there with the service managers in these more rural and remote communities actually make the projects easier to build. And so that's a really interesting thing for us, because we've always seen, a lot of folks assume, based on what you can see, that housing is a bigger priority in a more densified urban center. And we're starting to see that shift, I think, on at the municipal level, where some of these smaller municipalities are saying, you know what, we can do this, and we can tackle it, and we can see what our numbers are, and that's not unachievable. We can actually make a huge dent in our community, working with what funds we have.
It's interesting you say that because we've had similar experiences in York and Durham. You have multiple municipalities, right? And it seems to me it's the smaller municipalities that will look at remnants of land, will look at, really want to get things and have those levers. I remember talking former Mayor Von Mauricio Bellavacqua. He was a former MP. I think he was in the cabinet as well. And I said, "What's the difference?" And he said, "On a local level, it's much easier. You have levers to pull to make things go faster. You go provincial, federal, it's so much slower." He said, so I like actually getting stuff done. To your point, you've done a lot of great work. Are there one or two highlights that you would say, like, this is something real? I mean, you mentioned a couple, but if there's any more that you're extremely proud of?
Yeah, I think I mean, I think we're proud of them all. It's one of those things, you get attached to them, right? They take
Of
so
course.
long.
Okay.
They're a child of yours that grows up and eventually houses many people. It's a beautiful thing, if you have the patience for it, which is always where I struggle with real estate development. That you do need that multi-year patience, but I think there's a couple of things that we're moving into, or a little more, and we're seeing more of, is just on the retrofits, the energy efficiency retrofits. So we don't have any on the underway right at this moment, although we've worked on projects like that in the past. But we have a couple of those that are up and coming that we're really excited about, working with co-ops and working with nonprofits to future proof their buildings for the long run. Those are what's coming in the next year or two. But the one project I think that is a really remarkable one that came together is, uh, it's called Cornerstone Eccles, and it's a neat supportive housing project that just opened up this year. And it's a really interesting one because it was funded under the Rapid Housing Initiative, but it was an acquisition retrofit of and a very deep energy retrofit of a building that had quite a history of its own. It had been a schoolhouse, that had been an office building, and now it kind of came to last and be fully rebuilt as a supportive housing building with around 50 units in it. And so it's really interesting to see that one, because for me, those are the most exciting projects sometimes, the ones that we get to you know use these technologies in an existing building. We're seeing better results when it comes to embodied carbon, but we're still seeing the energy efficiency that we had before, and we're not changing the character of a community in a way that's controversial, right? In some ways, it's really simple to put these in and get nothing but community support for a building that folks are worried something's going to happen to. And it's funny the way people get attached to what's in their neighborhood, right? For worse or for better, we all get attached to what's around us. And so these projects where we've been able to do these more interior focused retrofits of older buildings, whether they have heritage designation or not, have great reception within the community and end up providing some really, really solid housing. There's some really great buildings there, and I think as we do more of these, and again, the one I mentioned before about that former student residence, as we get more of these buildings that we're starting to pick out that are built in similar ways, the costing is comparable, and there are situations where it's better. By no means every situation. You can't always retrofit for cheaper than you can build new, but there are times where you can get a product that's more suited to what you need and where you need it. And so that's a really great one that opened up this spring, which is a real pleasure for us.
I think we have to be open and creative, right? I mean, I think everyone always looks like this is the way, but there's no one way, right? So as you said, every retrofit doesn't make sense for a while because office buildings, were in Ottawa and Toronto. Well, they're not coming back. Oh, perfect. We'll use all of them for housing, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes it does, and you have to look at it. But I think you have to be open and creative, and there's not a one size fits all, right? You have to be creative and be looking at a bunch of different things. And speaking of different things in the future, what does the future hold for Cadco? What are you
I
excited
mean,
about?
you should call me on Friday because we're chatting about it this week. But we're at a really interesting time because we can see, obviously, as everybody can, that the sector is likely in for a bit of change when it comes to how funding comes to us. I think we'd be remiss not to acknowledge that we don't anticipate the same funding sources under a new federal government, which we're likely to have in the fairly near future. And a lot of our business over the last decade has been working on programs that ultimately ended up being the National Housing Strategy programs. And so we've applied successfully to pretty much every program that there is within that, which has been fun. Um, as we look ahead, we are actually exploring different ways that we can continue to work within the space to really hone in our mission again, which is you know promoting and creating housing. And so I think if you come back in a couple of years, it's entirely possible. I can't say which, and my board of directors will, certainly have a say in this as well. They should, but we are exploring different avenues and almost I would say different, call them different business lines of where we're going to fit in the best. We're not opposed to moving into general contracting for the smaller projects where we see the biggest gap in trying to find a competitive construction manager. Those less than site plan control 10 units and under projects are really difficult to put together, and the team that we have actually has the experience to put those together. So I wouldn't be surprised if we move in that direction. But we're also going to continue to hone in and work closely with whoever is in Ottawa. And by Ottawa, I mean whoever's in government to do what's necessary to create housing, because we recognize that the crisis isn't going to go away, regardless of the color of your tie. And so I think a lot of folks do as well. So as much as there's a lot of apprehension as we look ahead to the next little while, I do think that we're going to see a lot of people with that same experience in government who are going to recognize that they have to do something, and we'll find a way to work with what we have. And that's what Cadco's always done. So I don't know exactly what it is that we will be doing, but we were created at a time when it was almost impossible to build housing. That was why we were created, because it was so challenging to get some of these projects done. And I suspect that we will find a way to shine regardless of what comes our way.
It's a great attitude to have, and you're right. Listen, we don't have full control over who's in power. We're going to work with whoever's there to get the job done, and that's our job, right? Is to be nonpartisan and work with those people who are making the decisions and have the dollars, and try and convince them to put them in the best places. If people want to find out more about Cadco, if they want to reach out about the professional development pieces, or someone in Ottawa saying, "Hey, we'd love for you. We've got this project to work on," and they just want to dig a little deeper, where can they go to find out
Yeah,
more?
we're cadco.org is our website, and you'll see a lot of different resources on there to kind of get you started and see the different things that Cadco does and figure out how you might work with us best. So I always recommend people start at the website, just as a good place. And I mean, hey, if you're in Ottawa, we're right downtown, so there's always somebody kicking around the office. We do have an office, so we certainly take people when they're in Ottawa, and happy to have a chat with anybody. We're here to find solutions to this, and creative solutions between land development and construction, and um, look forward to working with more of the people we've worked with before, but also some new folks and new faces.
Amazing. Adrian, thank you so much for all you and Cadco have done and continue to do. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure.